Hi, so welcome to this video where we're going to have a look at how to write a good academic essay. So before we get into it, let's just think a little bit about essays. I'd like you to think about, why do universities use essays as a way of evaluating students? Just have a little think about that. Also, have a think about what are the characteristics of a good essay. Also, why do we reference other people in our essays? Why don't we just give our own opinion and leave it at that? Now, all of those questions we're going to come to in this presentation. So the first thing I want you to think about is different types of questions. So factual questions. So something like, how big is the market for smartphones? What is the stock price of Apple today? How many people do Amazon employ in the UK? Where are Nissan factories in the UK? Okay, now these are all in principle factual questions. Now we might not actually be able to put a precise value on some of these, but they are essentially factual questions. And so that type of question is not going to be the sort of question that you're likely to get asked in an essay question. Now, essay questions are generally going to be discursive questions. So, for example, how should managers talk to staff? How will digital disruption affect UK retail? What is the best strategy for Honda in Europe? Should companies hire external consultants to improve business performance? How important is leadership in business? Now, these are more suitable questions for essays. Notice that they are discursive, and because of that, there in principle is no right or wrong answer. So I might have a particular view of how managers should talk to staff, and somebody else might have a different view of how managers should talk to staff. And there's no way of really knowing which of the people is right, and of course in some respects both can be right. Okay, so the first thing to recognize is that universities don't ask you questions which have factual answers. They will ask you something which is debatable, and therefore they're looking for a discursive type of answer. Now, an academic essay is usually written in response to a question or a task that's been set. And so your first job in delivering that essay is to interpret the question or the task that's been asked of you. That's really, really important. And if you're not sure exactly what's being asked, if you're not quite sure what the task is, or if you're not clear about the nature of the question, then it's really important that you talk to your tutor about that and clarify that before you begin. Now, the question or task will include the topic of the essay, of course, but it will also include the instruction, which will be expressed as a verb. So, for example, assess, or discuss, or evaluate, or examine, or illustrate, or interpret, or review. So that type of verb. So pay particular attention to exactly what you're being asked to do. And like I said before, if you're not sure, make sure you check that with your tutor. Now, the instruction will invite you to present an argument. So I think one of the key things here to understand is an academic essay is an argument. You are being asked to present an argument, and that's often called a thesis. And it's expected that your argument will be supported by evidence from the literature. Okay, so you're not just being asked for an argument, you're being asked for an argument which is supported by evidence, and the quality of that evidence is important. We'll talk about that later. So, providing evidence. Well, I think it's really important to remember that, throughout the world there is a lot of research going on. All types of research, all types of researchers. Now, in the sort of business management and strategy arena, the research is obviously related to business and management. But obviously there's all types of research, and that research is undergone all over the world, and it is published in what are called the literature. Now, the literature that we normally refer to is peer-reviewed journals. So those are journals where somebody has had to go through a review process with their peers to determine if the research is of good quality. Okay, so anybody can publish anything on the internet, and of course anybody can write anything in a book and self-publish, but you can't write something and put it in a peer-reviewed journal. There is a gatekeeping process there. So in general, quality research findings will be published in peer-reviewed journals, and that's the sort of evidence that we're looking for. We're not interested in what various people think. We actually are looking for some kind of reliable scientific evidence, if possible, to support our argument. Okay, so the more that we can support our argument with high quality evidence, the stronger our argument becomes. Now, in terms of the structure of an essay, this would be a good structure, and I think this is a classic structure for an essay. So we start with an introduction, which should be relatively short, maybe half a page, maybe a little bit longer, where you introduce the topic of the essay. So you're just trying to orientate the reader so that they know what this essay is about. You should also be stating your argument. Okay, now we call that a thesis statement. Okay, so that's, this is what I'm arguing in this essay. And then we try and give the reader a sense of what the structure of the essay is. So, first I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, and that is the structure of my argument. And so that makes the reader feel much clearer. They know the topic, they know what your argument is, and they know the structure of your argument, so they can relax and they can get into reading the essay without having to sort of work too hard to try and understand the structure. So that makes a big difference. It's even more important in essays than reports to explain the structure of an essay in the introduction. Now, the body paragraphs, or the main body of the essay, is where you're actually presenting your argument, and it'll be a set of ideas in a logical order. We try, if we can, to put one basic idea per paragraph so that the essay is easy to read. This is important because essays in general are difficult to read. They often take a long time, and if they're not structured in a straightforward way, they become even more difficult to follow. So we want a nice logical order with links between the sections to help the reader, and we want about 3 or 4 paragraphs per page. So that's the sort of rough formatting that we're looking for. And then at the end of the essay, we want a conclusion paragraph which just reminds the reader what the thesis statement is, what your argument is, and just make some simple final comments. So if I were to pick up your essay and just have a quick look at it, superficially, it should look something like that. Okay, so 3 to 4 paragraphs, no headings, and those, as we can see on that page, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs there. We should be seeing nice linking words between the paragraphs just to help the reader go through. We call that signposting. So let's just have a look at those sections in more detail. So the topic, this is really just making sure that the reader knows that this particular essay is about this. And so you want to give a little bit of background information. You're setting the scene, not too much. You don't want pages and pages of context, because the reader, can't remember all that. They want just a little bit of scene setting. I like to keep my introductions quite short, because I think the reader at the beginning of when they first sort of open an essay, they're quite sort of nervous about whether it's going to be an easy essay to read. And so if you can sort of straight away have a nice punchy clear introduction, it makes the reader feel much more secure. Then your thesis statement, so that's your answer to the question, or the answer that the argument that you're presenting in your essay. It's a clear and concise statement of your view. So for example, this essay argues the rise of social media affects the practice of strategy making by making the relationship with customers more intimate, dynamic, and turbulent. Okay, so that's a nice, clear, concise statement of my argument, and then the whole essay would be about trying to support that argument. Now, over the years, I must have read literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of essays, and what often happens is students employ what I call the bucket approach. Okay, so this is where students get nervous because they don't feel that they know the right answer. So the essay is asking a question, and the students are going, "Ooh, I'm not quite sure. I don't know what the right answer is," and they forget that there is no right answer. So they go to the literature and they try and think, "Oh, what's the right answer? What's the right answer?" And of course, there is no right answer. So they get quite nervous. And so instead of actually giving an answer, they just put everything in there that they know. So they go to the literature, get as much information as possible, and just throw it in the essay. And it's a bit like getting everything on your table and chucking it in a bin and then handing it in. Now the trouble with that is, one, it's not an answer to the question. So you can't get a very good mark for that. Even if you've done a fantastic comprehensive literature review, if all you do is throw all the information in the essay, you're not actually presenting an argument. So your mark tends to be limited to about 65%. And the other thing to remember is that we don't mark your essay based upon whether we agree with your argument or whether we think the argument is correct. Okay, so that anxiety about worrying, have I got the right answer, is a waste of time. Okay, so don't stress about whether you've got the right answer. Just be clear what your answer is and present that. Now, I might disagree with your answer, but I'll still give you 95% if I think you've got a nice, well-written essay which is supported by good quality evidence. So be brave, say what you think, give your opinion. So, thesis statement, it's your argument. So all academic essays must have a thesis statement, because the thesis is your answer to the question. It's your view, it's your opinion, it's your argument. A thesis should be contestable and specific. Okay, so if I say something, you must be able to disagree with it. You can, no, I don't agree with that. That's fine. It's okay for people to disagree with your argument, but you have to have an argument. The thesis represents your views and must be clear, focused, and interesting. Interest is generated in the reader by making a substantive claim. Okay, so I love it when I get an essay and I open the page and the student goes, "This is what I think." You think, "Whoa, that's really cool. Right, let's see, that's interesting." Okay, but, someone who just says, "This is everything I know about this topic," it's just not interesting, because I probably already know all of that stuff. So there's just no real interest there for me. Be concise. If you can't state your thesis in 1 or 2 sentences, the thesis is probably unclear and too broad. Now it's difficult to get it down to a very clear statement. I remember when my wife did her undergraduate degree at the Open University. You know, when she was writing an essay, I used to ask her every morning, so what's your thesis statement? And she'd go, well, I'm thinking about arguing that Richard III, you know, he was doing this and he was doing that. And I'm like, well, yeah, but what's your argument? She'd go, well, I think I'm going to say that it's, you know, and eventually she'd get more and more concise. She said, right, that's my argument. So you must state your thesis. You know, be brave. Remember, the tutors don't mark your essay on whether he or she agrees with your thesis. They mark the quality of the argument. Now, the body paragraph, so each paragraph is part of your argument. So if you think of your essay as being like a set of building blocks where you're sort of building this logical development, try to have each paragraph containing just one main idea. That just helps the reader. If you've got lots and lots of ideas all over the place, it's really hard to sort of make sense of that. So try to help the reader follow your structure by adding signposting at the start and ends of the paragraph. That just really helps the reader. Now the conclusion paragraph, you know, it's just reminding, you're just trying to remind the reader what they've already read. So just restate your thesis, summarize the supporting evidence that you've provided in the body paragraphs. Okay, whatever you do, don't add new information there, because that's really annoying. Well, hang on a minute, you can't add new information in the conclusion. You know, that's that's just cheating, isn't it? So, you know, don't add new information in the conclusion. It's very confusing. Okay, highlight the main points. Give final comments. You know, a strong final message the reader will remember is useful. Use a clear transitional signal to flag your conclusion section. So, you know, so in conclusion, and then the reader knows that that's what's happening. And like I said before, it's really important that we have referencing in an academic essay. This is because the academic research makes progress through researchers in a community. You know, so there are lots and lots of researchers around the world relating to the particular topic that you're discussing. We need to know and acknowledge what our colleagues are doing and what has already been done. Okay, so, you know, in research, if I do some research and I publish it and I'm like, whoa, this is really good, but somebody had already done it, you know, 2 years ago, that's a waste of my time, but also it makes me look a bit silly, doesn't it? I don't know what my community is doing. So that's why we do literature review in research. We need to know if researchers have already generated findings. Okay, so, you know, if somebody's done a piece of research which is directly relevant to our argument and we don't know about it, then, like I say, it weakens your argument. So researchers produce evidence which we can use to support our argument. Okay, so that's why we do referencing. It makes our argument stronger. So, what is a good essay then? So, it answers the question. Okay, it presents an argument with a clear thesis statement in the introduction. It presents the argument logically. So body paragraphs follow in a logical order and are linked together in a clear narrative. Okay, so good essays are easy to read. It's like, okay, this is the topic, this is my thesis statement, this is the content, and then you go into the main one, it's boom, 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 boom. Therefore, that's my argument. You think, brilliant. You know, so the essays that get the really high marks are often the easiest essays to read. And they're supported by acceptable evidence. So body paragraphs include support and references to the sources of information. Okay. Now, in terms of writing your essay, students, often make lots of the same old problems, and so did I when I was an undergraduate. So the essay writing process is logical, but it's often messy in practice. So what often happens is that we kind of, get the topic, and then we start doing some reading, and then we thought, well, I think I'll start writing. So people start writing, and they don't know what their thesis is, but they're writing stuff down, and then eventually the argument sort of emerges, but they've already written most of the thesis, the essay, and then it becomes a process of trying to edit that back into something that makes sense. That's actually very hard. There's a much easier way of doing it, which is, choose your topic, analyze the question, then construct an initial outline plan, and you should be discussing that with your tutor if you're not quite clear. Then locate and evaluate some resources, develop an initial sort of thesis statement. I would do that quite early on, actually, because, remember, we're not trying to come up with the definitive answer to the question, which would require reading everything and spending years and years and years coming up with some kind of definitive answer, which wouldn't be definitive anyway, because of the nature of this type of question. So, don't sort of waste too much time agonizing over your thesis. Just adopt a thesis, relatively quickly, and then start to, collect materials which support your argument. And of course, you might also want to have some evidence in there that doesn't support, as a way of discussing, making your discussion a bit more balanced, and that's okay as well. So let's just go through those steps. Based on your initial interpretation of the question, start to develop your argument. So perform some initial finding out, create an initial thesis statement, explore what further sources of evidence might be appropriate. So you might start to look at other journals or other books. Begin to develop the narrative of your argument, and it's really a good idea if you can do that before you really start writing your essay. Okay, so it's much easier to write an essay when you already know what your thesis is and you already have a sense of what your argument's going to be. And then begin to develop the structure of your essay. Okay, so if you can do all that in rough before you start writing, then the writing will be so much easier and much more quick. Sources of evidence. So for an academic essay, we mostly look to the work already done by the research community. So journal papers, they tend to be the most up to date. Books by leading researchers, they often give a really mature and developed overview, but there will be a particular point of view there probably. Textbooks, I think, are also very useful because they give you more of a balanced overview of the topic, and that can be a good place to sort of help you sort of balance things out in your mind. And of course, the library is going to be our major key resource. Now, researching, in principle is straightforward. Obviously, you go out, you look for relevant materials, and you take notes. But I would be careful that you. The classic mistake I used to make was I'd go to the library and I'd read around everything, and I'd get really interested, and I'd make a few notes. But at the end of the day, I wasn't able to access that material easily. So, try and sort of keep records of what you're doing so that you can find things later. If you find a good source, then, make sure you write down the reference so you can put that in your essay and you can find it easily later. And it's a good idea to do the bulk of your literature reviewing after you've already decided what your thesis statement is. Now you might say, well, that's wrong. You should, review the literature first, and then decide what your thesis statement is going to be. But that's actually quite naive, because the reality is that there's way more literature out there than you have time to cover. You're not going to be able to read everything on a particular topic. That would take years and years and years. So you need to accept there are limitations to what you can cover in the time, and develop that thesis statement fairly quickly, and then go out looking for material which actually helps you directly with your thesis statement. So that's a tip for you. When it comes to actually producing the final draft, okay, so return to the initial plan, see if you need to change it, and then you must commit to your thesis statement. Don't allow yourself to be, unclear. If you're still unclear at that stage, stop and then get clear. If you need to go and talk to the tutor, that's a good idea. Say, look, this is my thesis statement. Is that okay? Yes, that's fine. Right, okay, this is my argument. Once you've committed to your thesis statement, then writing the essay becomes much more straightforward. So clarify the structure of your essay, be clear about the basic content of each paragraph, help the reader with signposting where possible. Say the text out loud to ensure it's easy to follow. It's always the case that when I ask students, what's that? They'll give me a really nice explanation. Or if I say, what's your argument? They'll say, well, that's my argument. So well, why didn't you just write it like that? Just write in the same way that you would speak. Okay, so just some final remarks. So remember, the reader must be able to understand your ideas purely from the text. Okay, we're not mind readers. I don't know what's inside your head. So unfortunately, you're going to have to write it down for me. Now, the reader wants to know your answer to the question. Okay, so they want to know, what is your view? What is your argument? If you don't put that down, you are automatically not going to be getting the very high marks, because the reader's going to be going, well, what's the answer? What's the answer? What's the argument? Ensure you have supported your view with evidence. Okay. Now, don't panic about that. You're not, like I said before, we're not expecting you to have read everything, but we want you to provide some evidence which supports your view. If you've just sort of read a little bit of a textbook and then you're presenting an argument, that's not really very scholarly. So we do expect some scholarly behaviour, but you don't have to read everything. Remember, the reader does not want to be bombarded with lots of ideas and quotes without a clear link to your thesis statement. Okay, so don't use a bucket approach. Please don't just throw everything you know about the topic into the essay and go, there you go, Giles, you read that. Because that's so frustrating for the reader, because when you read an essay and it's just lots and lots of information, you think, right, okay, straight away I'm thinking this is probably a bucket approach, but maybe it's this super, super complex, structure that I can't quite work out. And 9 times out of 10 it isn't, it's just a bucket approach. So remember, you'll get higher marks if you just be brave and try and give an answer to the question. Okay, hope that's useful. Thanks a lot.